Hi, welcome to MamaFuel. My name is Anne Ferguson. I am your host, and I'm thrilled to bring you this podcast that was created to fuel every mama's heart, soul, mind, and body, and hopefully spark a dream or two along the way. My mission is to change the way that we mamas treat ourselves and each other so that we feel better, live happier lives, and change the world one happier family at a time. In the MamaFuel podcast, I'm sharing real, raw, and often funny conversations with amazing mamas from around the world to remind you that you're not alone and that you're doing amazingly on this wild journey of being a gorgeous woman shepherding small humans as they make their way on our beautiful planet. You are amazing, and I cannot wait to share this conversation with you. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. I am Anne Ferguson, your host, and this week we are going to be having a conversation that I have been looking forward to for 2 months since I met today's guest, Valerie Knopik, who is an incredible scientist, researcher, teacher, yogi, mother of two. I could just go on and on and on. And also someone who is incredibly generous with her knowledge. And we met at a teacher training as part of my yoga medicine 500-hour studies that I'm working on. And it was a really powerful, week-long, intense, full session on yoga and mental health and well-being. And there was so much in those conversations that I kept thinking, gosh, I want to talk about this here in the podcast, in this container, and share a lot of this information with those of you who are listening and may sometimes feel like so many of us do, that there's something inherently flawed about you, or that somehow you are less than other people because of where you're at in your mothering or your life. And I am excited to share today's conversation because I suspect that it will go a long way to reassuring you that we're all human and doing the best that we can. And we're going to have some science behind that fact instead of, the cozy love, which is great. But boy, do I love me some good science. So Valerie, thank you so much for agreeing to be my guest. I really appreciate you making the time.
Thank you for having me. This is fun.
It is.
Nice to see you again.
I know, it's so nice to see you too. Because we met a long way away from where I am in Geneva. We met in Portland, which was 9 hours away time zone wise. That was some intense stuff coming back, I have to say.
I bet. And then having to sit in a room all day and lecture all day, every day for 6 days straight or something like that.
Yeah, and just wanting, it's such an interesting experience, right? Of to not be in that learning. I mean, I love, if you could see my office, I have probably no less than 500 books, either in my office or outside. I'm constantly reading, constantly learning. Mamas in the sisterhood hear me. I do readings for them. I'm constantly pulling information from all the different books, but that's very different than the experience of sitting in a huge space with 70 other people or so and trying so hard to learn stuff when I have not taken a science class since I was 15, and my teachers told me I was crap and should just never take science again. And there I am, 45, going, come on, brain, come on, crank it up. Let's try to do it again. And it was amazing and really, really exhausting.
Yeah, it was an intense week, I think, for all of us in such a wonderful way. But that was the first time we were teaching that module, and just kind of trying to see if it was going to work and how it was going to land and be received by the participants. And thankfully, it just was such a huge success. It went really well, but it was intense. It was really intense on both sides. I think for you guys to have to sit there and take it all in. But for us to finally see this course that we've been working on behind the scenes for a year or so to come together and actually work the way that we thought it was going to work. Yeah. It's incredible. So,
yeah, well, there was definitely, and I want to get into this later, and I'm just going to put a pin in it. There was definitely something really magical about watching you and your co-professor, Diane Malaspina, teaching along with Tiffany Cruikshank, the founder of Yoga Medicine, the way that you held space was really key. So I'm just going to put a pin in that and we'll come back to it. Okay. But let's take some big steps back, as we always do in this container of the MamaFuel podcast. And let's give everybody some context for who you are and what your life looks like right now, so that we know what the springboard is for this conversation.
Okay. So I currently live in a northwestern suburb of Indianapolis, Indiana, which if you had told me 5 years ago that I would be living in the Midwest, my husband and I and my children definitely would have just laughed you out of the room. We moved here 2 years ago after spending 13 years in Rhode Island on the northeast coast of the U.S., which is a very different community and vibe than Indianapolis. So we moved here 2 years ago. I'm a professor at Purdue University, and that's my full-time job. I am a part-time yoga teacher and teacher trainer for yoga medicine, which is also very fulfilling. I just celebrated my 20th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
Like a couple of weeks ago, which kind of blows my mind. And we have 2 children. My daughter is a freshman in college, and my son is a sophomore in high school. And we also have a 10-year-old Great Dane.
Who features occasionally on your Instagram, and he's gorgeous.
Usually, because he's pretty amazing. So I feel like I have a very full life. It's pretty busy, but I do feel, or maybe I've just convinced myself, I'm not sure, that I tend to function better when I am busier, when I have, not that I want to be busy for no reason, but when I have a lot of things in my life that fulfill me and that keep me kind of occupied. I feel like that's where I kind of thrive and do my best. I've never really been one to sit still. And that probably says something about me. I probably should take a little bit more time to sit still and pause. And I'm getting better at that at my age. But yeah, I have a pretty full schedule, and but I love it, and it's very intellectually fulfilling, and yeah, I feel finally in a good place. It was a really hard decision to move my family across the country because I think we had kind of thought we would settle in Rhode Island. Our children were 6 months and 2.5 years old, or 3 years old when we moved there, and they basically grew up there, and we thought we would live there at least until they were out of high school. But this opportunity arose at Purdue, and I just would have been a fool to turn it down. And it was so hard. It was the hardest decision we've had to make as a family. But I honestly haven't looked back. And so it's been really good. But again, if you told me that I was going to be living in Indianapolis, I would have said no way.
For so many reasons, I can imagine.
Yeah, just because I didn't, you think of it, I always thought of it as the Midwest, and not that there's anything wrong with the Midwest. In fact, I love it. I love living here more so than I did living in Rhode Island. People are so much more friendly here, and I've realized that I didn't realize how much the New England kind of busy, frantic, kind of impersonal vibe was getting to me until we moved here. So it's been kind of like this refreshing change of scenery and change of community that's been really nice.
Sounds like it's one of those things that you don't know you need it until you have it, and then you realize, wow, what did I ever do without this? It's so amazing.
I know. I had no idea. I was flying back and forth to do house things. We were building a house out here, and I'd come back and you walk into a store and everyone's like, "Hi, how are you?" And they're smiling and like, "Are you talking to me? I don't know you." But that's how it is here, and I love that. I didn't realize how much I craved that or something. So. Yeah.
The contact and the being seen, right? It's it's one of the things that we were talking about, that I've had often conversations with different people about around being seen. And I was reading today, I'm trying to quickly place it in the context. but my brain it's late here and my brain's going, nope, we're pretty much done for the day, which we can talk about. But it was around how, Lizzie had mentioned it in the podcast. That's why I was looking it up. So today on day of recording, I published my podcast conversation with Lizzie Rosinko that you were saying you listened to. And she was talking about how people need so much. We need so much to be seen and heard, and how there's a quote that you'll find all over Pinterest and all over Instagram and all the places. And I can't remember the guy's name right now because it's really long and complicated. But it basically says that there is that being loved and being seen and heard are so close that people often confuse the two because we need it so much. So it sounds like you have found a place where you feel seen.
I have finally, it only took me until I was in my mid 40s to find that place.
But you
and there
did.
were lots of, and I did, and I'm so grateful for it. And I found it in in a place where I never thought it would be, so we took a leap of faith, I think, by moving out here, and it's been a really good one, but it was so intense and scary at the time. Yeah. And I am glad that it has seemed to work out for everyone. But that's not to say I didn't feel a ton of guilt around it.
Yeah, I've just made
which I'm sure
pin.
We can talk about.
I just made another pin. Yeah, I did. Okay, so let's take a step even further back and to your beginnings as a mama, because in addition to being a professor at Purdue, being you're a part-time teacher for yoga medicine, but in fact your teaching schedule, because I look at all the trainings and decide where I'm going to try to apply and fly around the world, there's a lot in there. And I know that you're also creating resources for teachers and for anyone who's listening who has either ever taken a yoga class or who is interested in becoming a teacher or has had an experience in any way. There is this incredible community of teachers that you are a teacher of now. And that I'm in that group as well. And they're teachers who are learning so much more about the functional aspects of yoga, but also like the benefits in all ways. And there's such a strong medical background to what it is that we're learning, that and in a cross-functional way. So looking at traditional Chinese medicine, looking at all different types of yoga, looking at the chemistry, looking at the biology, looking at the psychology of the human being and the complex beings that we are, but also how yoga affects it and vice versa. That I urge you to go to yogamedicine.com and see if you have a yoga medicine teacher near where you live, because you will never, ever, ever regret doing that. It is such an incredible community. And I will always say, I go into those trainings, and the one in the summer was a little bit special because it was full of mostly North American teachers, whereas when we're in Europe, it tends to be a bit broader, people from all over the place. And so it was a little bit different, so I didn't see as many faces as I usually recognize, but I just walk in that space and it's like, boom, 75 people in my yoga family. There they are. And it's just this great community of people. Anyway, closing parenthesis, but just to say, in addition to all of those things, plus more that we don't know about, and you have a successful, happy marriage 20 years in, which is nothing to sneeze at. And you also are a mama. So can you go way back to the beginning and tell us about your entry into this journey of being a mama?
Sure. Gosh, where do I begin? Always knew I wanted to have children. I lost my mom when I was 12. So she had cancer and she had been sick for a long time. And most of my memories of her are from when she was ill. So I always had this desire to be a mom, but also not only that, but to be a mom and try to create some memories with my kids that they would remember for the long haul. Let's see. I can't remember how old I was when I got pregnant with Violet, but Violet was born in 2001. And my pregnancy with her was deemed high risk because, you're going through this process of the ultrasound where the big ultrasound, not the little ones that you get along the way, but like the biggie, where if you want to find out the sex of the baby, you can. And so it's, you're looking, especially the first pregnancy, you're looking forward to this huge day for so long. And we're in the middle of that ultrasound, and I could tell something was wrong. And the tech is going back and forth over a particular area, and I don't know what they're looking at, and she says, I need to go get the doctor or genetic counselor, whoever it was. And that individual came back in the room, did some probing around with the ultrasound, and then said, okay, go ahead and get dressed and come meet me down the hall. And my husband and I were like, what in the world is happening? Like, it was the worst customer from like a customer service standpoint. It was the worst patient doctor interaction ever, completely unsupportive. I pull my clothes on. I'm already crying because I immediately,
the worst,
assume the worst. And my husband, who's always been my rock, is trying to remain calm for the both of us as I'm tearing up. And they basically thought that they had seen a couple of things in the ultrasound that indicated that she might have one of two kind of genetic abnormalities, one of which is really serious, like children don't usually live after, for maybe a few months after birth. And the other one was Down syndrome, which we had prepared ourselves for because we both have it on both sides of our family. So that one, that was not necessarily bad news. It was something that we had kind of tried to prepare ourselves for. But this other one was particularly devastating. And I remember them saying, you can get an amniocentesis and find out for sure, or you can just wait 6 weeks and get another ultrasound. And I went back to my OB, and he convinced me that I had a higher chance of miscarrying from the amniocentesis than I actually had of having one of these things wrong with my child. They had seen like chorioid plexus cysts in her brain and an echogenic focus on her heart and all of this stuff. And it was really stressful. And I ended up not getting the amniocentesis, had the second ultrasound. Everything was fine. She was born. My son was born 2.5 years later. I was deemed high risk with him too. And they saw the same exact things that they saw with Violet, but didn't even like make me come back for a second ultrasound because technology had advanced so far in just those 2 years that even though I was deemed high risk and they saw the same things, it was no big deal at that point. So just these natural things of development that we now know, they just happen as part of the fetal development. So anyway, I had both of my children when I was on my postdoctoral fellowship, which...
In your spare time then.
In my spare time. It actually turned out to be a wonderful time to have them. We were living in St. Louis, and my advisor at the time was amazing. He was super supportive of me taking the time I needed, and kind of, we didn't have, as a postdoctoral researcher, I didn't have like maternity leave. We didn't have that kind of stuff. And so he and I worked together to create this very creative schedule for me where I could take 6 weeks completely off. And then we cobbled together this creative and innovative way for me to work from home, be in the office sometimes, so that I essentially, between his being flexible with me and my husband being flexible as well, I basically stayed home for 3 months with both of them. Wow. And worked, like sporadically from home when I could, but it was hard, but it worked out really nicely. And then we moved from St. Louis when, about 6 months after I had Ronan, which I look back at that period of my life and I just feel like I don't know how we did it. We were selling a house. The house was on the market, so for open houses, and we had a newborn and a 2.5-year-old and a Great Dane and 2 cats. And
easy to keep a house clean. Super easy.
I mean, I remembered piling all the kids and the dog, and the cats would stay at home, but them all into this little Jetta station wagon that I had. And we'd just go driving while people would come look at our house, or I'd go park across the street. We had this beautiful cemetery across the street from our house, which I initially thought would be creepy, but it was actually really peaceful. And we'd just go park over there and watch and wait for them to leave. But I just remember, I just think back to that time, what were we thinking? Because I had gotten a job offer from Brown University, and we were moving out to Rhode Island for me to accept that position. But oh my Lord, it was a tumultuous time when we had those kids. Well, especially when we had the second, because just life, you can't always control when things are going to happen, and you need to make decisions. My husband had never liked St. Louis. He just was not a fan. So he was happy to move.
Right. And so that makes it a lot easier when you're not dragging someone kicking and screaming to another place, doesn't it? So this obviously begs the question, at least obviously to me, how did you not lose your isht, as a new mama with a 6-month-old? And I just want to take a second to applaud your post-doctorate thesis advisor or research advisor, because flexible working is not something that's available. And for anybody who's listening who hasn't lived in the States or isn't familiar, 3 months off when you have a newborn is unheard of. Mm-hmm. A lot of people get 2 weeks. And as a Canadian, where you get a year, I find that horrific. I find Switzerland you only get 4 months, and you have very little protection. So what often happens is that women will be on mat leave and get fired during their mat leave, or get fired the day they come back. It happens all the time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's awful.
Yeah. So they're working on, they're working on evolving, and they're working on paternity. Dads get a day off if they have a baby, or if someone dies, a day. So it just isn't culturally something that is yet embedded, but there is a lot more conversation about job sharing. There is looking at, 60% work, 80% work. So it is moving along, which is great. Late, but great. But I mean, how great that 15 years ago, 20 years ago, almost, you were able to, like you said, be creative, cobble it together. And I bet that professor got way more out of you thanks to your commitment and dedication and loyalty than he would have had if you had felt forced to do something that was just tearing your heart into shreds.
Yeah, it was. We cobbled together a calendar that incorporated all the sick leave that I had available, all the vacation time I had available, and interspersed a few working days there. And I mean, he also allowed me to bring them to work with me. I mean, as a researcher, the working environment, your office space is usually pretty laid back, and it's not a kind of corporate workplace where it would be harder to bring a child in. But I was really fortunate, really, really, really fortunate, especially because he didn't have any children at the time when I had Violet. Now, when I had Ronan, he and his wife were pregnant with twins. Whoa. And so there were a group of us in the office building where we were all pregnant. Thankfully, I was the only one pregnant with a singleton. Literally, there were five of us pregnant at the time, I think. 4 of them were pregnant with twins.
Whoa.
4.
What was in the water in that building?
I know. We always had that joke. Something must be in the water in this building. So
that's hilarious.
But I was really fortunate. He's an amazing person. So I'm really, really glad that I was working with him at the time.
One of the pins that I noted was, so I do just want to say, I did an interview with somebody named Claire Farrington, who has a little guy with Down syndrome. And the conversation that we had was the day before she gave birth to her second son. So Theo was born, I want to say he's almost 4. And when he was born, it was a very traumatic delivery. And it was only after, not right away, there was a delay before they said to them, once he had been through the really, really preemie phase and he had survived all of that at some stage, and I'm sorry, Claire, if you're listening, I don't remember exactly how many weeks had elapsed or months, but they then had the news that when they were able to bring him home, he had Down syndrome, and they had no information, no education about it. No, like it was the sort of general, you can have this test, and if they have Down syndrome, here are your options, most of which go to deciding to terminate the pregnancy. Mm-hmm. And her plea in our conversation was for people to understand and get to know people with Down syndrome and the richness that they bring, and the beauty and the perspective and the lightness and joy. And
incredible.
Yeah. And if you have people with Down syndrome in your family on both sides, you would know way more about that than I do, because we don't have anyone in our family. But I do just want to refer back to that conversation with Claire, because it was a very moving conversation. Obviously, she was very terrified because she was about to deliver again, and she had made it to her full-term birth, which was super exciting. Mm-hmm. And she was going to meet this little guy, and he's 6 months old now, and everything is great. And Theo's an awesome big brother, and Freddie's like, everything is awesome. But it's just a really moving conversation. And I would encourage anybody who is thinking about having a baby, or who is going to have a baby, or thinking about any of these things, to listen to that conversation, because we need to talk about different kinds of people who are differently wired, be it the extra chromosome or be it in other ways, because there's such richness in the diversity of humanity that we're at risk of losing that if we edit, if I can say that.
Agreed. 100%.
Okay, so my second pin. And I'm chuckling because when I did my conversation with Emma Stroud that I published last week, I had like 5 pins and I could only remember 2. So now I'm actually physically writing them down. Okay. So one thing that comes forward to me as you're talking is that you have this career that you're pursuing that you clearly love, having been in a massive room learning from you for a week. There was enough information. There was probably more information to fill a month.
Or more. I was thinking as I was lecturing, I was like, this is like a semester, just my portion, which was like half of the content. Just my portion alone was more than a semester's worth of content for any kind of regular undergraduate level class that I'm in. Okay,
well, that feels so good. Thank you for saying that, because the smoke, like they had smoke detectors in that place. It should have been going off, because what was happening inside my brain was, anyway, it was amazing. But
you're not alone.
Thank you also for that. So you have this career that you love and you have a passion for, and you talk to us about genetics and you talk to us about epigenetics, and I really want to dig into that in a second. But what strikes me as you're describing your journey into becoming a mom and your recent move to where you live now is that it sounds like you have been the lead career for moving the family around, at least in those 2 moves. And I'm curious how, first of all, I love it, because I think anybody who has a passion and a career that they love and has the ability and the opportunity and the support around them to play in that brings such wealth to the world of knowledge and of excitement and of modeling to the kids too. And I'm also a little bit fascinated because in Geneva, in the expat world that I live in, a lot of we professional women have found ourselves at home because a lot of us don't speak the local language and have moved because of a husband's job. And sometimes it's both people in the couple. And then you realize that actually childcare is so expensive that it's not really worth working, and you might as well stay home. And it's just kind of an odd environment in the sense that many very educated, very passionate women find themselves at home scratching their heads wondering how this happened. So it's particularly exciting perhaps from this kind of weird 1950s bubble that can sometimes occur. Not so much for Swiss women, like women who are from here and who speak the language as I do, but who have grown up here and have a network and they're working. It's more the expat community. So talk to me a little bit about that. You're saying you have a lot of guilt making these decisions and feeling a lot of pressure and weight around moving your family from the only place that they had ever known. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Sure. Every move we've made since my husband and I got married has been because of me. Every single one. We met in Colorado where I was in graduate school. We moved to St. Louis for my postdoctoral fellowship. We then moved to Rhode Island for my job. And then we moved to Indianapolis for my job. I carry a tremendous amount of guilt, and I still do, even though we've both talked about how happy we are here in Indiana. But it doesn't remove my level of just feeling, I do feel guilty. I feel grateful at the same time that he has always been so supportive. But I do feel that guilt. And I'm not sure if things would be different if he was in a different type of job. So his job, for the most part, allows him to be more flexible because he's in kind of web design and mobile app development. And so his job prospects usually, not always, but usually there's more flexibility for him in terms of, especially when we moved to New England, Boston is a huge hub for that kind of stuff. He was in hot demand out there, which made it even that much harder to move, because moving to the Midwest, we are kind of behind the times with regard to those kinds of jobs. And so it took him 2 years, really. He kept his job in Boston when we moved and was commuting back and forth. Mm-hmm. And now has since found a local job, but it took 2 years for him to find a local job that he felt was really fulfilling to him. And I feel guilty about that because I've had this job that has been fulfilling to me, even though I won't get into that. I was at Brown for a long time, and it was time for me to go. Mm-hmm. It was time to leave, in terms of like hearkening back to what you were talking about being seen. Mm-hmm. That was not a good environment for me at the time when I left. So it was a good move. But, I think I've, for the most part, been pretty fulfilled by my job, and to move my family and my husband, knowing that it was going to take him a while to find something here, was incredibly challenging. Just because I want him to be happy too, and we've been married for 20 years. And I know you said it is an accomplishment, but it has not been an easy road. I mean, we were separated for 6 months at one point, and have really built our relationship back up. And I'm so glad we went through that rough period, because we're in such a better place now, but it was horrible going through that. And I don't know if things would be different if he had a different type of job, because if he was in academia, for example, it would be really hard for us both to find jobs in academics. Yeah. So I thank my lucky stars that he's not in academia, that he does something completely different that allows him. I mean, I was so grateful to his employer in Boston, who allowed him to basically work from home. He was home for 3 weeks out of every month, and he would fly to Boston for 1 week out of every month. He did that for about a year, and then he's had a few jobs here in the Indianapolis area, and finally has settled on one that he really, really enjoys and feels fulfilled in. But it's, that's challenging. You want your family to feel like, I don't want to be the only person in our family unit who feels fulfilled and happy. And that was hard. That's been really hard. So
it's so fascinating.
And every time, like, my children have struggles with friendships or whatever, even though those struggles probably would have happened in other forms, just because of their ages, back in Rhode Island, but still I would always layer on this extra kind of level of whatever, thinking about it like, oh, if we hadn't moved, or oh, this. But I know in my heart that it's been a good move for all of us, and they agree, like they all agree, but it's still, I can't quite let that guilt go. I was raised Catholic, so
Same.
Yeah. There.
It somehow gets into the cells.
It just somehow gets into the cells. It's an epigenetic thing, I think.
It is totally an epigenetic thing. We're going to talk about that now. That's fascinating to me, because...
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it totally does. And it's particularly hot for me right now, because I recently for the last few years, I've been hosting what I call Mama's Urban Retreats or mini breaks. And it's essentially the goodness of a retreat condensed gently into 4 hours on the basis that you can probably find someone to leave your little one with at, 8 in the morning or 9 in the morning, come to meet me for 4 hours and then go back, pick up your little one, do the groceries, whatever. Nobody needs to know you were gone. Like if they're in school, like you can come and see me. Nobody needs to know you were gone. And they'll just be like, oh, mom's a little bit less grumpy. I wonder what's going on. If they even notice, back to being seen. And what has been, and I've been working in the mama space for a few years, wanting to support and build community. And it's happened to a degree, but just literally last week at time of recording, the penny dropped that so many of the mamas I talk to are drowning in overwhelm around motherhood, especially in the early years, lack of sleep, confusion, guilt about wanting to be 100% with their babies, and also, God forbid, wanting to go and finish their post-doctoral fellowship or wanting to go dance out because they used to be a Zumba fanatic and they just want to go dance, but shouldn't they stay home and be with the kids? And this tension that is so strong that it actually pulls them down. And so many of the moms I talk to are in a place of not realizing that they feel like they're under an ocean, but in fact they're in a pool. And if they would just reach out sideways, they could find the edge. And if they would just reach up, hands would draw them up. And I have been on this because I'm so frustrated for the women that I speak to, because I have been there so much and I know how that feels. And was talking to, Rebecca Ching, who was also an earlier podcast interviewee, and she's trained in the Daring Way by Brene Brown, and she's a psychotherapist and a psychologist actually. And we were talking about shame, we were talking about guilt, and because they're BFFs, and talking about trauma and how small T trauma, instead of huge T, you lost your mom, and I'm so sorry, when you were 12. I think, you said that, and my oldest daughter is 12. And I just think, as a mom, the thought of leaving them, but also inversely seeing her now, my heart is hugging you so hard. And so she was talking about small T traumas, things like, the little glancing blows of a miscommunication with your partner, or a disappointment because you didn't get the promotion, or someone making a comment that doesn't feel good. And it's a bit of a death by 1,000 cuts. And I've been feeling this frustration because every time we let ourselves down, and whatever that looks like in your life, I'm going to get out on the mat and I don't do it because I'm just going to lie in bed, or I'm going to, how many hands up, how many times I'm going to go and meet that friend for tea. And then you end up canceling because it's raining, or canceling because your kids need you for some trivial thing that you decide, okay, I'll stay home and do whatever. And then 5 seconds later, they've forgotten and you're like, crap, I could have gone. So that sort of death by 1,000 breaking of your own promises to yourself is something that is so pervasive, and that I really feel about so much that I think I'm going to create something around putting yourself first as a mom, unapologetically. And what I hear and what you're describing is that you have created with your husband an environment in which not only is it okay for you to put yourself first, but you've done it in really bold, in the sense of not bold, in the Irish way, which means being naughty, but in big ways that have big effects on your life and your family. And I'm all of me is doing the glad hands and clapping for you because I don't hear that very often.
That's interesting. I don't know. That's interesting. I've never heard anybody say it to me like that. I like that. I don't know. It's not like I mentioned in my last kind of story, we are here because we have had our struggles and have had to learn how to communicate with one another. And I'm talking about my husband there, because there were times 10 years or so ago when things were really challenging, and he didn't understand the things that were fulfilling to me, if that makes sense. And I didn't understand the things that were fulfilling to him. It's kind of like, I think this happens a lot. You have two small children and you both work full time, and you're trying, and we didn't have family. I heard on one of the podcasts that I was listening to, that I think it was with Lizzie, that you were both talking about not living near family.
Yeah.
And the challenges that come with that, right? You can't just say, hey, I'm going to drop you off at grandma's house. Because grandma lives 2 plane rides away. It's
on another continent. Yeah.
On another continent or whatever. And so we didn't have those kind of family networks either. And so I think we've just really had to figure out how to communicate with each other. And it took us separating for 6 months. And I swear, I thought we were going to get a divorce. And I mean, I will never forget those days. They were horrible, but it forced us to both do our own independent work in therapy and work together in therapy to figure out how to communicate with each other and to appreciate and respect the things that the other person needed to feel fulfilled outside of the couple unit, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I need that independent part of me. And yoga was that for me. And I kept inviting him to be part of it, honestly, and he just wouldn't do it. And then he finally came around and started practicing. I remember we went on a vacation shortly after we got back together, and he said, I've decided I'm going to start coming to your yoga class. And I was just like, my heart was so full, because I felt like, well, even if he only comes once, he'll at least maybe be able to understand why this is fulfilling to me, like why this brings me joy and why I'd like to teach, and also that it keeps me sane. That's my sanity keeper, is my yoga practice. But it's taken a lot of communication to get to that point where I feel like I can do the things that fulfill me outside of the home. And that doesn't, I do feel, for me personally, and I know this isn't a one size fits all kind of thing, but for me personally, the time that I spend away going to a yoga class, getting a massage if I can, or just being out of the house running an errand to Target for 30 minutes, that time is so important for me to come back and be more present with my family.
Yeah.
And I think that for a lot of women, we struggle with that, because there's the guilt about being with children or being at home with the family. And what does this say about me if I go and have my own thing? But it's also a challenge, I think, for partnerships. If you can't communicate about that, or if your partner doesn't understand why something is fulfilling to you, and either you can't articulate it, because some of those things you can't quite articulate. I could never articulate to him why yoga was so important to me. It literally took him coming and taking my class and doing it regularly for him to see the community that I had at that yoga studio, the joy that I got out of teaching. It took him actually being a part of it with me for him to understand why that was fulfilling to me. And then for him to be 100% supportive of me. Like, he is my Instagram photographer. He's my website creator for my yoga business. I mean, he's like full in, and that means the world to me. But it took a lot. It took so much to get there. And so while I appreciate that you have said that I've figured out a way to make myself a priority, I've done that with the help of him. And my family, and my children. But like my father and my brothers look at me, they're like, why do you do all that stuff? Why are you driving yourself crazy? And why don't you? And I'm like, but I'm not driving myself crazy. Like, these are things that are fulfilling to me. They might not look like they would be fulfilling to you, but we all have our things.
Well, and there is a piece in what you're saying again, that I hear about being seen. Like your husband took the step to come and see you in your element in a different context than your professional full-time life, and in a different context to being his partner of choice for life and his co-parent and mother to the kids. And he saw you, and he sees you, and he sees what lights you up. And that's what is so beautiful. And I also want to say that I love that you, through your practices and through your difficult conversations and journey together and apart, you have found, it sounds like you have really found ways to take up space. And when I was saying that the moves for your family that have centered around the professional opportunities for you, I literally have like I can feel this entire like gang of really raucous cheerleaders behind me going like they've just won the championship and they're going bananas because you found a way to take up space without, okay, you have felt guilt about it. Okay, there has been friction, and here you are taking up space. Yeah. And I want to say that as someone who learned from you in a very big space that you were holding with Diane and Tiffany, that it is a beautiful thing to see a woman passionate about what she does, sharing that passion with other people and with her colleagues. To see you working together with Diane was like watching a really beautifully choreographed dance. And because you were both so passionate and you were sharing everything that you were, it made me want to learn even more. Like I was wrecked by the end of it, but I didn't want it to end because I just there was so much more, some of which I'd like to get into now. So let's completely switch lanes and get into epigenetics, because in the intro, I was saying that often I hear mamas talking about how that's just how I am. I'm really anxious. And this was a topic that came up a lot in our conversations at the mental health and well-being training in the summer. Because when we did sort of an informal, like as people were talking throughout the week, it became evident that almost every single person in that room had either lived with anxiety, lived with depression, was working with communities, serving people who had addiction, whatever the mental health challenge in reality was. Present company included anxiety being my shotgun driver all the time. Pretty much, not all the time, but most of the time. Yeah, and you too. And you had mentioned that. Let's talk a little bit about this concept that that's just how I am, and therefore it's a fatality. Like it's just how it is, and nothing's going to change it because my mama was anxious and my grandpa was anxious, and now I'm anxious. And I have said this to a psychiatrist in an office. Brought my youngest in, who was really struggling with anxiety. Like I couldn't take the dog to pee on the grass in front of my house, like not in a field, like in front of my house. I couldn't take my dog to pee on the grass in front of my house. She would literally be shoving her fist into her mouth, terrified to not scream because I was outside the house. And so we went to see a psychologist, and I was like, listen, I am like, she comes by it honestly. Dad and I are both pretty under like baseline anxious. My mother, my grandfather, like there is a boatload of anxiety, and that's just how she is. And she said, hang on, we can change that, right? And I was like, excuse me? Say that to me in another language that I also speak. Like, what does that mean? And so let's talk about that, because it is not a fatality. And we could do a whole other podcast. We've almost used up all of our time. And now we're getting into the juicy stuff about the epigenetics. But talk to us a little bit about what that means. What is epigenetics, and what have we discovered about that concept of, well, it's just how it is?
Yeah. So in brief, this will be like the speed dating version.
Total speed dating. But maybe we'll have you back now that we've done this one time.
I'd love to come back. So essentially, we're born with the DNA, our genome. We're born with a certain kind of genetic code, if you will, that is interspersed or contained on our chromosomes that live in all of our cells. And you can think of those things. I wish I had a book handy, but if you were to just open up a book or look at this, you are here behind me on this on this picture, right? So you are here, those letters, the Y's, the O's, the U's, and all those things, that's your genetic code, your DNA. And those genes code for who we are. They code for all, like, we each come from a single cell that divides, and certain cells become hair cells, and certain cells become heart cells, and certain cells become brain cells. And that is all contained in our genetic code. Similarly, many of our behaviors are coded for by genetics, but there's no single gene that is the anxiety gene. There's no single gene that's the depression gene. But if you think of this as your genetic code, those letters aren't going to change. But let's say I took a highlighter or something. Imagine this is like a bright yellow highlighter. And I highlighted maybe the word you and the word here. Then I left R as it was. You could think of that highlighter, the yellow highlighter, as an epigenetic mark. So we are exposed to things like, it might be exercise, it might be financial strife, it might be work challenges, it might be medication. We have all these kind of things that are banging on us all the time. And those quote unquote stressors, which can be good or bad, we tend to label stress as bad, but stress can also be good. Those stressors can put epigenetic marks on our DNA. And again, this is like the speed dating version. So if you were, again, to imagine that this is highlighted in yellow and this is highlighted in yellow, but the R is kept as it is, then those epigenetic marks would say it's emphasizing. I'm going to say, you are here, right? Like I am emphasizing, I'm screaming or yelling the words you and here, and I'm whispering the word R, or vice versa. It's telling certain genes to work harder or certain genes to work less, or be expressed more, expressed less. And just like we think of like bad stressors adding these epigenetic marks on our DNA, good things can also remove them or change things. So I think one of the coolest things that we've learned about epigenetics so far, so this is a really young science, we're still learning about it. We still don't have a really good understanding as to how how the environment, stressors on the outside of us, get in to highlight certain parts of the genome and make them turn on or turn off. We still don't understand all of those mechanisms, but one of the things that we are figuring out is that it's not all bad, right? So it's not all that if you are experiencing something bad, you get one of these words highlighted, your gene turns off or turns on, and that's it. Boom. Destiny. No, that's not the case. You can actually reverse some things. Things can change. And the protective factors that we know that can change our gene expression in a positive way are things like community support. So the more supported you feel by your community, whether that's your partner, your family, or the women or men around you, your community, positive kind of self-healing techniques, meditation, breath work, good food choices, plant-based diets tend to do good. If you think about maternal care, so if we're kind of taking it back to overlaying this on maternal issues, we know that maternal support and warmth and caregiving and good monitoring and just being there for your children can actually create really good kind of epigenetic marks in your children's system in terms of offsetting and changing how children manage stress later in life. It's called the stress immunization effect. It's pretty cool. And so epigenetics is just a way, it doesn't change your genetics. It doesn't change your genetic code at all. So if you go back to this example, it didn't change the letters, right? I just was going over with a highlighter. And you could think of it if you were looking at a book. All those little letters that make up your words are your DNA. But if you take a highlighter and highlight certain things that you want to go back to and read again and emphasize, you can think of epigenetics like that. It tells your genes whether to turn on or off. Think of it like a dimmer switch. Sometimes it's going to be really bright and turned on and screaming and working really hard. Sometimes it's going to be dampened down and not working so hard. And epigenetic marks is a way for the environment, both good and bad, to get under the skin to change how our genes are expressed. And it's really cool. And I think that the big takeaway is that like we have this capacity to change our internal landscape. And that can happen through things like maternal warmth and care, social support, doing kind of healing modalities like yoga and meditation and breath work that tap into the nervous system. But by doing those things to create kind of good epigenetic marks, we're also creating these new neural pathways. And neuroplasticity is also, I think the jury's out as to whether it's truly epigenetic, but we tend to think of it as something that it's a way that the environment kind of gets under our skin, because if we can change the way that we think about something. So if, for example, I'm struggling with a health issue right now, and I've been struggling with it for a month. And if I were to succumb to this thought pattern of, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? That has a very different connotation than, what is this teaching me? What can I learn from this? Right? So if you can change the way that you think about something, you are actually creating new connections between brain cells and the neurons that fire in your brain. And when you use and reuse and dedicate energy to creating positive thought patterns, you're changing the way that your brain is wired. And neuroplasticity is this other big buzzword that we use, but it's, again, this way for us to actually change our internal landscape. So it's not always that, you have a family history of mental health challenges and that means you're doomed. I just don't think that that's true. A lot of it is because there's just not one single gene that leads to depression or mental or anxiety or anything like that. It's a combination, a constellation of multiple things: genes, environment, these epigenetic kind of nuggets that live on top of your genome, and the way that we think about ourselves. I think we have a lot of power in the way that we think and the words that we tell ourselves and the stories that we tell ourselves. And if we can reframe our cognitive thinking, which is not easy, but if we can work on that, I think we have great power to change our landscape and our story in a very positive way.
That is something that really struck me as well. And that was something that Diane was talking about a lot. She was talking about false cognitions and this idea of, and I often say this in the sisterhood, mamas who are in the membership, they hear me say this all the time. And I've said this multiple times on the podcast too, like the story that I make up about you, or the story that I make up about this situation, or the story that I make up about myself. And we can be conscious maybe of the stories we make up about others. It's much more tricky and subtle to pick up the stories we make up about ourselves. And then when we have those stories that we make up about ourselves, we start looking for confirmation bias, which is when you're looking for proof that what you believe exists. And the more you look for it, this what you focus on expands. Well, it's because we have this amazing ability, which is a superpower if wielded properly, to look for confirmation of what we believe. But if what we believe is a series of false cognitions or of crap stories, to use layman's terms, about ourselves or about situations or about the inescapability of a circumstance, then we're going to look for evidence of that. And so we don't have time to go into the complexity of the surface scratching that we did over 7 days even. But I would just love if you could for a second touch on, yes, on the one hand, we have this incredible capacity to change and to evolve and to create new neural pathways. And I would love to have you back to do, and it's not fair asking you this here, but I would love to have you back to do a masterclass on how that actually, how the actual synapses are connecting and in the brain. I can't stop watching the video about how synapses move. And
that was such a cool video.
It's actually real. It's physical. You can see. So when people, if you've heard anyone talking about, getting, those grooves, the neural pathways, like getting out of the thought groove or the neural pattern groove that you have. Like, it's an actual physical thing. I thought it was an expression, but no, it's an actual physical thing. And also, while we do have this capacity, what Diane was clear about was, this isn't another thing to beat yourself up about, that you're not doing this, that you're not able to make this change, that you haven't just been able to write enough affirmations to make yourself feel better and get out of the anxiety, or just shake off that depression. Taylor Swift will shake off whatever, but it isn't, what we're saying isn't, because we're learning that how epigenetics work, and the highlighting and lowlighting of different genetic markers may mean that just because your ancestors suffered from depression means that you can not have to necessarily go through that path. At the same time, there are actual genetic realities that may make it more challenging, and to be kind to yourself in the way that this isn't another place that you're failing, is what I really want to say.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can't. That's right. I don't ever want that message to be sent. I think that like anything else, changing your cognitive framing and your thought patterns takes a lot of work.
Yeah. And support.
And support.
Yeah.
And for me, years in therapy, and even still, I don't do it great. It's I'm just trying to do the best I can. I did mention, I am dealing with this health thing, and there have been tears of frustration and times when I just completely get down on myself about it. And then there are times when I'm successful at kind of trying to put it in perspective, but it's work just like everything else. And you have to be kind to yourself and just do the work as you can at the rate that you can. And knowing in your heart, I think that your genes are not your destiny. I think that we do have this capacity for change, but it takes work and support and practice, just like anything else. It's not a quick thing, which is why I think part of our message at that module was really trying to give people the tools and the foundation and understanding of the complexity of the human being, the human condition. And we tend to want to compartmentalize things because it makes it easier for us to think about it and to problem solve. But the reality is that we're complicated beings, and we have so many things that are going on in our lives as women that we need to manage, and many hats that we need to wear. And just like you might be patient with yourself about, not getting out of bed, choosing to stay in bed rather than go to a yoga class, or choosing not to be social that day because you just didn't feel like it, so you called and canceled having tea. You also need to be kind to yourself about if you get down on yourself or, aren't thinking, what is this teaching me all the time? It's this positive, what is this teaching me? What is this teaching me? I had there are several nights in the midst of this health thing where I have been in tears, waking my husband up why is this happening to me? I'm strong, I'm healthy, I eat the right things.
I know all this stuff.
What the heck? So just, being patient with yourself, just like anything else. And that's a lesson. It's so hard to swallow that we don't really learn that lesson and become, and at least for me, I haven't really been able to be comfortable in that lesson until I'm in my 40s.
Yeah.
If I could just tell my 25 or 30-year-old self that, you're going to be fine and you need to be patient with yourself and all this, I just don't think we're ready to hear it. when we're that age, or we aren't ready to develop cognitively, or I don't know why. We just, for most of us, it just takes us getting into our 40s to be able to start to be comfortable with who we are in our own skin, and knowing that we're going to make mistakes sometimes, and just being okay with that.
Yeah.
And that includes the way we think about ourselves and the stories that we tell ourselves. But I think as long as we know we're aware, and we forgive ourselves and give ourselves a break if we slip, or, maybe it's not, we don't even want to call it slipping, if we just aren't practicing that day.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's okay.
Yeah. It's the oft repeated instruction of be patient, all is coming.
Yeah.
How many times have we heard that? And begin again, it's something that when you are a yogi and a teacher, like always remain a student and begin again, fall off the wagon, get back up, begin again. I cannot count the number of times I have begun again on that mat. And we're hanging out a lot these days, and I'm very proud of that. And it's a beginning again every time, and forgiving yourself. I'm conscious of time passing and want to ask you one final question, which is, where do you get your MamaFuel? In this season in your life?
So in this season of my life, I get my MamaFuel from a few different places. Clearly, like, my own self-care practice is a big deal, but I find myself getting my fuel actually from my children and my husband, more so from my children these days. I think because of their ages, they are able to, even when they are frustrating, and they are able to give me a hug or send me a text, because I don't see my daughter that often right now because she's at college. But sometimes if she'll just send me a text or respond to me or ask what I'm doing and can I FaceTime with her, or when she texts me to ask me advice about something, I've run into this, what can I do? It's something as simple as, like, someone spilled fruit punch on my white shirt. How do I get it out? The fact, like, that I'm still needed. And my son, he's still in the house, and I always say, like, if his hugs just fill me right up, right? Ronan hug. His name's Ronan. So can I have a Ronan hug? It's just that, like, sense of, I don't know, they just fill me right up. So I get it from kind of the places that you might think of: going to yoga, taking a bath, meditation and those things. But I also get it from my family themselves. When we take a moment to pause and just, whether it's hug each other, text me, my daughter, sit down and have, maybe it's just watching something together or having dinner together. Those are the kinds of things that I really just kind of tuck away and tuck away in my heart, tuck away in my mind, and that I can draw on when I need it.
So beautiful.
And I think that comes from not having my mom. I just keep trying to hang on to all of these little nuggets and pieces of memory that I can create with them, so that I can draw on it, but that also so that they can think back and remember it too later. So
beautiful. Valerie, I could talk to you for a long time, and I would love that masterclass on
let's figure it out.
On the brain. We will figure it out, and I will let everybody know when and how we're going to do that. But thank you. I wish you a fabulous end to your day, and I'm so grateful to you taking the time to talk to me today. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. It was so nice to see you again, and have a great evening.
That's it for this episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. Thanks for listening. There's a lot more conversation, sharing, and real mama talk happening in our private Facebook group. To join the virtual village, go to www.mamafuel.me/Facebook. That's MAMAFUEL.me/Facebook. And be sure to say hi when you get there. If you like this episode, or if you know a mama who could use a little mama fuel, and let's face it, we all have times when we're running on fumes, I'd love you to share this episode and to rate it and leave a review. The algorithms work that way. The more reviews there are and the more sharing there is, the more mamas will be able to feel encouraged and supported with the conversations that you just listened to in Mama Fuel. Every comment helps, and it's always a super delight to hear from you. Thanks, and bye for now.